Hello and welcome to Europa Universalis 4. I am Lord Forwind, here with a guide on how to play Portugal as part of the continuing of my How to Play Countries series. So Portugal happens to be a pretty unique country in terms of how you play it. In my argument, it's right up there with like Austria, any theocracy or something, or Burgundy in terms of their unique start. Overall, though, this will cover basic expansion, ideas, how to play them, who your allies are, where to colonize. Considering you're Portugal, you're going to colonize. So first things first is starting off, this is of course 1444. You want an alliance with Castile. Luckily for you, Castile 99.9% of the time will accept an alliance from you because of a historical friend modifier and same religion. So I advise you, if you play Portugal, to immediately get that. Other than that, you also start off an alliance with England, which pretty much eliminates two of the only people who would ever attack you from the game, as long as you keep your alliance with both of them. The odds are, though, you'll lose your alliance with England, just saying, because they'll get into wars with France, and you don't want to get into wars. As Portugal, you are pretty much the outpost of Europe on the west side, and your job really isn't to conquer things as much as to colonize things. So the only real conquest you really need to do is you want to try and conquer a good portion of Morocco early on. In fact, you get missions like Conquer Tangiers. If you do it, you get 200 admin power just for this one province and a center of trade. If you can do it, it's worth doing it because it will give you more control over the Sevilla trade node, which otherwise Castile tends to dominate on you. Other important things, if you have the ability to use states, you want to try and grant states like Porto and Tangiers, once you conquer it, to the merchants, the burghers, and that will help with your control of the Sevilla trade node. Luckily for you, it's an end trade node, and Castile will also be steering trade to it. And if you're friends with Castile and then later Spain, you have really no enemies to worry about. You can go through the game pretty much without being attacked really by anybody if you do it right. As Portugal, most of your game is going to revolve around colonialization. So essentially, you'll be using your national ideas to colonize and trade. Your traditions give you 5% trade efficiency, 30% trade range, which is not too useful. When completed, you get 20% global tariffs, which is really useful because you will have several colonial nations, and the more money you get from them, the better. So your first national idea gives you plus 25% colonial range and plus 25% national sailors, allowing you to have a large fleet and explore the world sooner than anybody else. The plus 25% colonial range is huge. Your second idea, plus 10% goods produced. Your next one, plus 10% trade power. Next one, free merchant. Then this one's unique. You get negative 15% construction cost, but you also get yearly absolutism. Not many countries got yearly absolutism. True, it's a small amount, but it'll help. Then you have land before faith, the global settler increase, and then you have trade efficiency. So as you can see, let's see, at least 4, if not 5 of your ideas revolve around trade. Depends if you make the argument merchants are solely about trade. So essentially you're going to want to take colonial ideas. I recommend for your first idea group either, and this is a little controversial, sometimes I argue that you might actually want to take religious ideas to start. You if you can get that +3 missionary strength, you can actually convert Moroccan lands because of the negative 2% local missionary strength. On the other hand, you can try and get a Inquisitor advisor and convert it slowly that way, but the +3 missionary strength helps. The other option for you is to go exploration. Those are really the only ones you want to start with. Militarily, you're not going to have an overwhelming military force. In fact, your wars against Morocco are really going to revolve around you calling Castile to aid you, which means expanding there is going to be slow. I suppose you could make the argument you could pick like defensive or something. But you want exploration. Specifically, you want the Quest for the New World that allows recruitment of explorers or conquistadors. And then you want overseas overseas exploration plus 50 colonial range. You will, by and large, be able to colonize with your first exploration idea, because this Argon here, Argon is usually in range, and then there'll be other colonies, other provinces down here you can colonize. The reason I kind of advocate religious ideas before exploration ideas is because you will just barely have the range to reach the New World, and you might not even have it till you reach level 7. I can't remember exactly, but it's not like there's a huge rush for you to get to the New World. You'll still discover it before Castile will, and before England and France will. So, and since level 7 is, again, when you get another idea group, you can do it that way, or you can flip it and do religious as your second idea. It's really personal preference, seeing how it's really down to how much land you've conquered from Morocco. Seeing as Ceuta here, you see it's Sunni, it's going to revolt just alone based off intolerance pretty much, so you have to do something about it. Usually I move my army down there because no one's really ever going to invade your homeland unless you really mess it up. And that's initially how you want to start. For your third idea group, it's pretty self-evident. You want to take expansion ideas, get some more merchants, some settler increase, recruitment, diplomatic relations, you know, the whole works. It really helps here. After that, it's really kind of open-ended. You've already got the ability to colonize most places. Economic is good. Espionage ideas might be nice too for the reduced liberty desire of subjects, which does affect colonial nations. Quantity, quality. Quality is actually pretty good because you're going to be using ships, unlike most nations. And that'll all balance out in that direction. For colonialization countries to get colonial nations. Sorry, that was a little confusing. Brazil. Go for Brazil. Historically, the Portuguese controlled Brazil, and it is a very rich, very prosperous colony for you to get. You do not have any ideas other than this one, global settler increase, to help you colonize, which means Castile, who does, is like their third idea, will be able to colonize faster and colonize more provinces than you can. Plus, at some point, France and England and maybe France will join in. Although I have seen Brittany and like Holland colonize, it's rare. So if you wanted, what you want to do is you want to try and set up colonial nations within each colonial region before anyone else starts colonizing there. If you do, the Pope by and large will give you control of that region, which means other Catholic nations won't colonize there if they can colonize elsewhere, if that makes sense. So if you get Brazil, by and large, Castile will not colonize there until they've run out of other places to colonize, which means if you colonize the coastline, they'll never actually be able to colonize that land. But what you want to do is you want to try and snag Brazil first, because you won't have the range to reach the Caribbean, especially if you go exploration ideas first. You'll be a little bit short of getting to the Caribbean, if I remember. And if you get, I think it's 5 or 7 cities there, you will get a colonial nation, colonial Brazil. Then you want to jump up, try and snag the Caribbean. Once you've snagged the Caribbean, it really depends what Castile's up to. By and large, I found that they will start colonizing either Colombia or Rio de Plata, which is below Brazil. If they haven't taken Colombia, try and snag Colombia. It's quite useful, and then it gives you a choice. You can essentially go and try and colonize Mexico and try and conquer the Aztec, or try and sneak around using Colombia to get to the Inca. And at that point, you're large enough, powerful enough. Plus, you'll be able to call Castile into war. Since you're not going to be fighting many wars, you'll have plenty of favors with them to conquer them. Other places to go? Well, you have a very good shot at colonizing Guinea down here. If you go exploration ideas first, it's probably where you'll be colonizing to begin with. You can pick up the control of their centers of trade, the Gold Coast in that area. You can also snake your way down. You can try and get the Congo converted to Catholicism, which they might do. If not, you can always declare war and conquer them, which is, they're a pretty good nation for you to conquer. They tend not to have many allies. They're always behind in tech, easy to conquer. Further south, there's South Africa, which ideally you want to capture, especially the center of trade there, because that way you'll control most trade traveling around Africa. And then you'll head up, and there's Madagascar, Kilwa, Zanzibar, that whole trade node region. Again, easy to conquer. You can probably invade, take over Madagascar, then move to the coast. If you conquer the Mutapa region down here, there's like 5 or 6 gold mines. If you're hurting for money, that's the place to go in the game to get it. Beyond that, once you discover India, you'll usually get an event where the province of Goa in western India will automatically be ceded to you, which can actually lead to some tensions with either Bahmanis or Vijayanagara, which tend to own the province, but they'll still give it to you 99% of the time, which is a nice little hop, skip, and a jump. And then beyond that, you can start colonizing the islands. Try and snag Australia. It's pretty easy for you to do. Essentially, you'll have the option of first colonizing any part of the world before anyone else. So it's really pick and choose. Where do you want to go? How do you want to do it? Some important things to note: if you take exploration ideas and then you have expansion ideas, if you follow this, it's second to the bottom on this list, you can get a global settler increase plus 20%. Also, if you, well, you can't do plutocratic, but there are different ways to get more and more settlers. Essentially, you want to try and take the policies that give you more colonists. You also get a mission sometimes to like explore Africa and stuff. There is a couple achievements for Portugal. Specifically, one of them that I know fairly well is the Henry the Navigator achievement. Essentially, reach India before 1500. I have a video on that. I'm not going to really talk about it here, but suffice to say, it takes a lot of clever maneuvering and very in-depth knowledge of colonization. And in fact, actually, that reminds me about one other thing you want to know about colonizing. If you look at your estates, the burghers, they have, well, they don't have it now, but once you get a colonist, they'll have an option which is, oh, I can't remember what it's called. It's like support colonial ventures or something. It will also give you global settler increase, which is really handy. It leads to a lot of them. Another achievement for Portugal is not so sad a state, as Portugal have a colony in Brazil and Africa. Talk about an easy achievement. You'll probably get that almost immediately. It's not particularly hard. The easiest way is if you colonize Aragon here and then place a province in Brazil, you've got an achievement for Portugal. Other than that, they can go for all the standard colonization achievements. The reason I'm not talking about Europe much is you shouldn't get involved in it at all. The only place you really want to do is conquer maybe Morocco and some of North Africa if you're interested. You could be stupidly reckless and try and take out Granada before Castile, but I don't recommend it. Other than that, the only other things that might get you involved in Europe is there's a chance that your personal union with like England or Castile will result in you getting a personal union over them. Which can then, of course, throw you into all sorts of European politics. I once got a personal union over Castile as Portugal. Well, Castile was Spain, so I ended up picking both Aragon and Naples up. Talk about a disaster move. The Aragonese hated me. Castile did remain loyal, but Naples was also fairly rebellious. Luckily, at that point, I had taken espionage ideas, so I had reduced liberty desire. In those cases, you just want to try and get your diplomatic reputation as high as you can, army as high as you can, maybe take like diplomatic ideas. In fact, diplomatic ideas are not a bad thing as Portugal for the reduced war score cost and just relations and stuff. Influence you could also use, especially if you're going to vassalize nations that you're conquering before you actually absorb them. But that's pretty much it. As Portugal, I would say, in terms of nations to play, I would probably say Portugal is the second easiest nation. They might even be the first. Most people say the Ottomans are the easiest. I would say Portugal might be easier than them. They're pretty easy. Other people argue Castile, Spain, which is relatively true as well. But Portugal tends not to be, no one wants your land, no one really cares about your land, and you're just going to dominate trade. That also reminds me, at some point you do want to take trade ideas. It's really useful steering trade. Luckily, Castile, even if you don't colonize as much as they do, they'll be steering tons of trade towards this node, and so will Genoa. Sorry, Sevilla is not an end trade node. Genoa is, but between you and Castile, you'll own most of the trade there. So essentially that's it. There's not much to Portugal overall. Obviously, if you talk to the Pope, you want to stay Catholic, so you can get all their modifiers. Specifically, the sanctioned commercial monopoly, the +1 mercantilism, or mercantilism, is very strong because it will give you, of course, more trade, which will give you more control over the Sevilla trade node. Essentially, as Portugal, you kind of run around picking up high trade provinces, getting lots of trade, steering it back to Castile and you. Other things you should do is if you're in Africa, you can put it in trade companies, which will also prevent the natives in that area from getting institutions and therefore techs with you. It will also give you more trade, specifically land that you're not really going to use is really useful to throw in there. Plus, if you get the control of the trade node high enough, you get a free merchant, which is always good. I was running around with like 13 merchants or more as Portugal. Essentially every single trade node that I wanted to had a merchant steering it straight into Sevilla. Even trade nodes I didn't have much in, like some of the Chinese trade nodes, I still had presence in because of merchants and downstream trade power. It was amazing. You can easily make like 100 gold per month as Portugal by the end game. But you're never going to conquer anybody really unless you go for it. You're just going to be left alone and you're going to colonize. It's one of the more peaceful and easy countries to play in Europa. And that will be it for this guide. If you've got any advice, comments, or questions, leave them below. I didn't really go into Portugal's events because they don't have tons of dangerous ones. They don't really have any super major disasters. So if you've got any questions about that, leave them below. I'll answer all your questions. If you're also interested, I've done other guides on how to play countries, so check those out. I also have a guide for the achievement of Henry the Navigator. So if you're curious about that, you can look at that as well. And if you enjoyed this, please subscribe, like, and keep watching these videos. Let me know about other countries you want me to do, and I will do them. In the meantime, however, goodbye. Enjoy playing as a peaceful Portugal.